Season 2 was arguably the pinnacle of power. We saw Kanan's ultimate manipulation, which resulted in Shawn's death, Tommy and Lobos being arrested, and Proctor being introduced into the world of power. But the ending with Kanan versus Ghost. What if Kanan actually won? How would this have impacted the storyline? And how would this have impacted Tommy and Tasha in particular? I'm talking all things Season 2, Kanan versus Ghost. So welcome back to MovieBot. Let's talk Season 2, Kanan versus Ghost. So hope you're all doing great, and last week I covered an overview of Season 1, mainly focusing on Ghost and Tommy's organization being hit by Kanan and Roller's death. What if Roller was never killed by Ghost? This week we're doing the same with Season 2, just talking all things Kanan and Ghost and their storyline in this video, with references to how some of the 48 laws of power were used, how everything unfolded from Kanan's point of view, and what if the outcomes were different. And I'm doing another Season 2 recap video covering all things Joe Proctor and Ghost as well, because I do want to dive deeper into his character. But let's do an overview of Season 2 before we talk Ghost versus Kanan and the what ifs, and I want to start with the way Kanan manipulated Shawn, Tommy, Dre and Ghost. From the very first minute Kanan was released from prison, we saw him working and manipulating Shawn, telling him to bring information from Ghost and making sure he kept it quiet, that he was out of prison. Kanan was using the law of concealing your intentions here, and this is where we were actually introduced to Dre. The conversation that played out between them was how they were going to play Tommy until they introduced him to the Connect. Now when Kanan went to go visit Ghost and Tommy in episode 2, notice how Kanan never asked Ghost about how his business was, but the minute Tommy walked in, he asked Tommy how was business, and Tommy started yapping away about the issues with the RSKs. Kanan already knew that he could work the angle with Tommy, and the title of episode 2 was ironically No Friends in the Streets, and this showed Kanan and Ghost that they were not friends. But in Ghost's words, Tommy had already been drinking the Kanan Kool-Aid. Ghost initially said that they needed to get to know him again because prison changes a man, which actually makes me question why did he trust Kanan about the Roller information if he said prison changes a man. They had to get to know Kanan again. Ghost really did slip here, but also showed that Kanan manipulated Ghost into trusting him in killing one of his most loyal people in Roller. And Kanan actually started working Tommy in episode 3 when they went to the laundromats. Tommy yapped away telling Kanan that Ghost went to Miami, gave the location of pink sneakers, which Kanan used Dre to go and deal with her before Ghost could. But this is where Ghost found out that it wasn't Roller who ordered the hits, and what Kanan did to even manipulate the situation even more was using law 39 of the 48 laws of power, stirring up waters to catch the fish. Kanan stayed extremely calm and objective, and within this law, if you can make your enemies angry while staying calm yourself, you can gain a distinct advantage. Killing Q-dubs, he caused havoc for Ghost and Tommy and left them with only one option, to give Kanan the RSK's territory. And you could see how Kanan was manipulating this situation. He was moving 3 steps ahead of Ghost at this moment in time, just like he said to Dre as he laughed on as Tommy told Ghost that Kanan taught them everything that they know. They had to give him the RSK's territory. But one of the most pivotal moments was this conversation between Ghost and Kanan. Ghost read Kanan here, and this is when he figured out that Kanan was the one behind the hits, but he just couldn't be sure. Kanan actually disappeared for a couple of episodes, returning in episode 8, which was ironically titled 3 Moves Ahead, something which Kanan said in a conversation to Dre that they were 3 moves ahead of Ghost because they had a revolt going on with Ruiz and all of the Primeras. And Kanan further manipulated the situation by reaching out to Ruiz and telling him that Lobos was in town tomorrow, and Ghost and Tommy didn't tell him. They disrespected him, and Kanan was just being 3 moves ahead of Ghost as he got the whole network together: Ruiz, Dre, Drifty and Vladimir the Serb. Kanan was planning to meet with Lobos and telling him that Tommy and Ghost had lost control over the whole organization, and that means there's no need for Tommy and Ghost. Kanan was just 3 moves ahead, but so was Ghost, who had a plan of his own, which was to have Lobos and Tommy arrested, but he had a plan for Tommy using the sketch to release him, something I'm going to touch on in my video when I talk about Joe Proctor. Now all Kanan needed was to meet with Lobos because Lobos was planning to kill Tommy and Ghost anyway. Kanan would have been the new distro, the head of the Primeras, if it wasn't for Ghost being 3 moves ahead. This led Kanan to rethink the plan and give Shawn the task of killing Ghost, but of course we knew he couldn't go through with it. While Kanan planned his next move by playing chess, he killed Shawn, telling him he was never his son. And this wasn't the only ruthless moment that we saw from Kanan. From the very first moments, we saw how ruthless Kanan was going to be, killing the contractor who hired Kanan pink sneakers, ruthlessly killing Q-dubs and killing Brock, cutting his tongue and schooling Dre on picking and trusting his crew carefully from now on, and also teaching Dre the art of the 48 laws of power. Law 12, using selective honesty to disarm your victim. Kanan told Dre to go to Ghost and tell him that he wanted to be on his side because he couldn't trust Kanan anymore. Kanan actually killed his son Shawn. Kanan taught Dre how to use selective dishonesty here to gain Ghost's trust. So while all this was going on, Roller's death was still impacting Ghost in more ways than one, mentally and hurting his pockets because it was affecting his business. The RSKs and Q-dubs were reluctant to do business with Ghost if the other one was under the same network, and Ghost's shipment from Filipe Lobos was more than doubling. He had problems with dead and D-trusting Primeras Primaras, and he had no choice but to give Kanan the RSK's territory, but Ghost was also 3 moves ahead in his own way, something I mentioned earlier on which I'll cover in my next video. So let's talk about that fight between Ghost and Kanan and if the roles had been reversed, because this was the pinnacle of power. Season 2 was the greatest, and this conversation between Ghost and Kanan was based on pure emotion, anger and hurt that Kanan had been feeling while being in prison for 10 years. While he had Ghost at gunpoint, he said to Ghost that he's gonna do him just like he did Roller. While he had Ghost grasping for air, he said to Ghost that he thought about 100 ways about how he was gonna kill him while he was locked up, blowing his brains out in his club, throwing him off his pretty penthouse suite. But this was even better than he thought, and in that moment, and before Ghost stabbed Kanan, let's reverse the roles. What happens next? How could this have impacted the rest of Power and changed the course of history if Kanan killed Ghost, or if he thought he'd killed him like Ghost thought he'd kill Kanan? Of course, you could argue that Power ends there, because you could say with no Ghost there's no Power. But Power, in my opinion, could have then finished in Season 5 before moving on to Power Book 2 Ghost and the spin-off series, because Season 6 was heavily centered around Ghost gaining his political power, and a season that maybe they didn't need because Ghost as a politician, I personally wouldn't have liked to seen it. But for argument's sake and for a bit of fun, I want to know what you guys think and how you think it would have played out, so just comment it down below. Let's say Kanan thought he'd kill Ghost just like Ghost thought he'd kill Kanan, and with Ghost already killing the Serbs, Drifty, making Ruiz disappear, Lobos' drug network was completely dismantled. Now Kanan's original plan was to have Tommy introduce him to Lobos and then clip him, but now it wouldn't have been as simple as just being introduced to Lobos and killing Tommy, because the network and the Primaras that Kanan had worked and turned against Ghost would have been dead. So he would have needed Tommy, but Tommy would have been in complete turmoil. In Season 3 he was in turmoil anyway after he was ordered by Lobos to kill Ghost, but he loved Ghost, he couldn't do it. So Lobos was coming after him and Holly, and as Tommy really started to face these problems, a familiar face came to help him. Tasha came back into the fold. Tasha started to act like a real badass in Season 3, and if there was no Ghost at this time, if he'd been recovering after his fight after Kanan, then Tasha could have really stepped up in this moment more than she did. She showed that she could get shit done, and I would have really liked to have seen her get a few more kills and unleash this side to her that I don't think we quite saw until she killed Lakeisha. Of course, we saw Tasha, she could handle a gun and she would have been willing to use it when Kanan came to her house, but if we saw this ruthless and killing side to Tasha to really put this female dominance and power into this show, like how they tried to do with Power Book 2 Ghost and Monet, which I don't think they've quite done just yet. I think it could have worked really well with Tasha instead, and it could have been some real character development and growth for a character going into Power Book 2 Ghost by giving this character the real fear factor. There would have also been an all-out war between Tommy and Kanan. We could have seen Kanan and Dre versus Tommy and Julio, and Kanan knew this. If he somehow dealt with Ghost, then he'd have a war on his hands with Tommy within minutes, but Kanan was smart and strategic. I do think he would have outfoxed Tommy, and Ghost would have had to come to his rescue just like when he did when the Korean Mafia did a drive-by and tried to kill Tommy. Stepping back into the fold, I would have actually loved to have seen Ghost be the one getting revenge for Roller, because throughout Season 2 his death still haunted Ghost. But these are just two of many things that could have potentially played out if the roles had been reversed, and anyway, Kanan did die eventually, and in Tommy's words, rest in peace you tough bastard.
What the fuck, Uncle Tom, you about to smoke that shit?
Yeah, they did it for Tupac. I think we ought to do it for Kanan. Kanan Kush, but K up in the sky where he belongs.
So that's just a quick recap of Kanan vs Ghost in Season 2 and a what if in an alternate Power universe. So drop me your thoughts, because I'm interested to see your version of events, if it played out differently between Ghost and Kanan, and not just between Ghost and Kanan. If you would have played out anything differently in Power, drop all your thoughts down below in the comment section, and I'm going to go into a bit more detail on Proctor and Ghost's character and role in Season 2 as well in my next video. So if you haven't done so already, then remember to smash the subscribe button if you want to see everything Power universe related. But thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.